Hello, welcome to What About the Wetlands, a podcast where we talk all about the wetlands on Vancouver Island. I'm Taryn Pickard, and I'm your host for this series, and this is episode 8, and the only one that is just me. So for the past 7 episodes, I've interviewed different people from all walks of life that have involvement in wetlands. I've talked to people from scientists to farmers, in fact, the owner of this beautiful farm that I'm sitting on right now, and just locals who have dedicated large portions of their lives to saving marshes. This episode is going to be a little bit different than the rest. This is kind of just a review of the entire thing because there was so much information in all of these interviews that I wanted to kind of put a summary together and just talk about the incredible information that we learned. There was some common themes that went throughout all of the interviews, and then there was a lot of differences and different points of view that people had to share. And I feel like kind of reiterating those things and giving you a place to kind of come and look at all of those different points of view is important. I also, because of how much information there was, I have notes. So don't judge me for having my notebook today for this interview, but that is what's happening. So to start off with, I'm just going to chat a little bit about what brought me here in the first place to doing this thing, because I dedicated months of my life this year to interviewing people about wetlands, and obviously there's a good reason for that. I have been involved with wetlands in a very direct way for the past 3 years, but I've been in love with bodies of clear water, fresh water for most of my life. 3 years ago, I got involved with Hamilton Marsh, which is just a little ways from here. I did an interview with the director of the Hamilton's Forest and Wetland Preservation Society, Carrie Pickard.
The 36-hectare wetland, which is the large body of water. Beyond that, there are vernal pools and smaller wetlands, and that's why we are the Hamilton Wetlands and Forest Preservation Society.
She has been involved for 20 years in trying to save that marsh, and she brought me in to help with those efforts, and through that, I came up with the idea of doing this podcast. So if you know anything about marshes, you know that there is a ton to know about marshes, but very few of us know pretty much anything about them. That's the craziest thing. Marshes impact every single aspect of our lives in one way or another. They're an incredibly important ecosystem, but yet most of us have no idea about them. Many of us believe that really they have no purpose. And that has kind of been the prevailing idea about marshes for like hundreds of years, coming from Europe and over to North America. The idea has been that marshes are just like sitting land full of water that can't be used for anything productive. So for hundreds of years, we have traditionally drained those marshes in order to turn them into farmland or housing or whatever. But in the past 30 years, Gilles talks about this a little bit, in the past 30 to 40 years, we've realized that marshes are in fact incredibly important for our survival and for the functioning of water systems throughout the world.
I would say probably yes, the 80s, when we started looking at water and the movement of water differently. There was a lot of perception of water as something that, what's the word for it, that had negative effects, right? Water needed to be captured, piped, and moved somewhere else. And if you wanted to develop the land, right? So, and then suddenly by doing that, we realized that at the end of the pipe, there was a lot of water coming out quickly. And then we started realizing the flooding issues, the erosion issues, and say, oh, what's going on here? And then management of the land with the water and integrating, dealing with water, not getting rid of water, was a shift.
Right.
In building and changing the land.
So as that has come into view of scientists in particular, or lawmakers, politicians, the attitudes around marshes and the understanding of what needs to be done with them has begun to change. But there is still a huge ways to go when it comes to understanding marshes, especially in the public eye, because again, most of us have no idea about this. I've learned a lot talking to the people that I interviewed and from being involved with Hamilton Marsh, but I know about this much and there is this much to know. So I'm expecting that most of you know even less than I do because, again, very few of us have spent the time to actually learn. Understanding why we haven't had value for wetlands, I think, is one of the most important parts of this whole process of learning how to kind of move our world into a place where we treat wetlands better.
Wetlands are often relatively flat, fertile, rich soil, great for agriculture or land development. So they're threatened by just habitat loss, being converted, drained, for other uses, and then of course invasive species.
You could build a house. The old people would pop a plank off a tree, right? The whole tree didn't have to die. You could just take a plank off the tree and then build your home. And I think that that sense doesn't exist anymore. That's everybody needs their own bedroom with their own house, with their own, like, that communal living. People don't have that in their thought process very often anymore. It's like everybody needs to get locked up in their own space.
So on our Hamilton Marsh tour that we did, I don't know how many months ago now, you were talking a lot about how much the marshes were used for food traditionally.
Food and for the I think probably less food and more the cattails was an important part of our history, and the other rushes. I can't remember their names.
Bulrushes?
Yeah. So they would be woven into big mats and they'd line the inside of the longhouses, because when they're dry they shrink and when they're wet they swell, so they become waterproof in the winter on the inside of the longhouses, and when it's summer and they shrink, then it allows the breeze through. And the same in the summer, there would be tents. People would travel, they'd be rolled up mats that make into tents, right? So when it rains,
cool.
they swell and then you have a waterproof tent. So bulrushes were huge in our culture. So gathering rushes, and they would be refreshed every couple of years because they're natural, right? And there was a big process to making them, and these big long needles that would get threaded through, and it's pretty cool. And they'd be creased. If you creased them, they didn't break off as quickly if you didn't crease them. So lots of technology, I think, came from marshes.
So I think one of the biggest takeaways that I have from talking to so many people about wetlands is how many of the processes that go on we don't see, but those processes are incredibly important. And to me, that's kind of a philosophy for how we live life in a broader sense in society. We don't necessarily have as much value for the things that we can't see. So coming back to the idea of why it is that people have had such little value for marshes. And this is kind of a theme that has come up in numerous episodes as well. But it's just basically the fact that in this society, we don't value the things that we can't see as much as we value the things that we can see. And marshes on the surface look like they're just this still, gross kind of body of water. But in reality, there are so many processes going on that are deeply adding to the world around us. Like, we got into this chat with Gilles talking about how wetlands actually add back into the aquifers.
Wetlands are also kind of a source of the water for water located downstream. So like looking at the Hamilton Marsh is part of a tributary to French Creek. So it's part of this larger watershed. So every wetland is part of a watershed, and it will supply water and groundwater to the aquifers, and aquifers are connected to rivers. So ultimately those waters will end up in rivers, and they will be end up filtered through aquifers, and they're part of supplying water. They're part of the system, and they can store water due to their surface, and due to the fact that water moves very slowly through a wetland. We need elements that slow water, and mostly like with climate change, when we are going to have more water and quicker fluxes of water, having elements that break down the velocity of water is also an asset for nature and for us.
But if we don't take the time to slow down and actually to start observing and acknowledging the fact that there is so much going on around us that we can't see, then we never truly understand what is going on around us because we don't see those unseen processes. And for many, many years, I think as a general wider society, especially European-based societies, we focused so much on what can be seen and what can be quantified that we've kind of missed those other processes that are going on around us that maybe we can't quantify in the same way, but are just as important, if not more important.
You know, I talked a bit about how I would go on a lot of walks when I was younger and just grew up really exploring the different ecosystems. And to me, wetlands, like swamps and bogs and the random like meadow lakes that you stumble on in the woods were the places that were the most intriguing to me. There's just like, you like smell them before you see them, right? Like you can smell almost like this like earth matter or like kind of decay, I want to say, but it's just, there's like a fullness. And being sites of transition, that to me as a child, I couldn't articulate what that meant, but as I've gotten older, I've started to understand the importance of that. The importance of valuing and connecting to and acknowledging a space that kind of straddles the line between life and death, I think is super important as humans to be able to acknowledge, because it allows us to connect deeper to these ecosystems and feel like we are part of that.
So the first question I asked every single one of my guests is, what is the definition of wetlands to them? And every single person had a different definition of what wetlands were, which honestly I was kind of surprised about, but also very happy because it set a good tone for every interview being very different, which is cool. So I'm going to show you two different definitions that we got from two different guests that are on complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but I think are very important for understanding kind of the holisticness that is a wetland.
To me, wetlands basically are the definition of life. They're ecological spaces where basically all the biological processes that are necessary for life occur. There's decay, there's regeneration, recycling of nutrients and matter, the reemergence of new life. Just, you have all of this movement and change happening at the same time. And yet I find that they are often quite overlooked ecosystems. And they also, to me, represent spaces that are liminal, so transition spaces. And I think those are really important for humans in general to connect with.
Well, wetlands, there's the technical definition and then there's the philosophical definition. The technical one is that they're areas of land that are either partially or totally submerged during most or part of the year. And that creates a whole different kind of array of habitats, whether it's shallow water or just mud, whether it dries out in the summer, whether it's wet year-round with a pond on it or a lake. So wetlands have many different aspects. You've got fens and bogs and swamps and marshes. They each have their own particular characteristics, and they're all fascinating. Now, another way of looking at them is they're mysterious, they're exciting. You can slip and fall. You can find incredible flowers like the little calypso orchids that you would never see anywhere else. You've got all kinds of life and death going on around in the trees above, in the water below, and along the shores. So it's a fascinating place where one can spend hours just exploring and looking and learning and listening. Birds use it, frogs use the wetlands. There are all kinds of different trees. Humans have used wetlands for forever, for millennia, for all the different resources that are there also. So wetlands are complex, they're fun, they can be dangerous if you're not careful and use your head, and they're a source of food and materials that humans have used since time immemorial.
We've gotten to the point in the world now where an estimated 35% of wetlands have been eradicated in the past 700 years. And because wetlands, like we just talked about, are so incredibly valuable to us as human beings, but to every species that comes in contact with them, as well as to our water systems, to how our hydrology and weather both work, this has had a huge impact on climate change, on what we see around us, on how we interact with the world around us. And even since 1970, it's estimated that another 22% of the remaining wetlands have been destroyed. And that's world over. That's not just North America, that's not just Vancouver Island. Vancouver Island is incredibly important, I think, and particularly interesting to see how much of our wetlands have disappeared because, like Carrie Reed talked about, so much of this island used to be wetland.
I didn't know till I met a surveyor who told me about old maps that showed how much of this area was wetland before contact. Like all the foreshore area was wetland. There was areas where it was higher, but for the most part, the whole foreshore was wetland. And lots was, and I think that understanding is not there. Like how much of the, those estates along the beach were filled in for homes, or they were on spots where there was an old village site because that was available for people to build on before contact, and the people knew it was dry. So, but the ones that weren't were filled in, and you can even look at some of the old photos in the museum, and you can see people trying to get through. There's one I pass quite often going up to Courtney, and you can see where that photo actually was, and the people being stuck in the wet, like in the not able to get the wagon train through.
So even with all the information that we now have about wetlands and how important they are, we are still having a hard time protecting what is left of them. And I had a few guests on here that are very deeply involved with trying to save wetlands, trying to protect wetlands. And they had some really interesting things to say about why it's so important to do this work.
There were, in our neighborhood, I live in Hilliers, and a lot of ribbons were going up, and we were losing lots of forest to logging. And I saw the ribbons go up outside of Hamilton Marsh, and I thought, what the, right? And so I went in and I looked, and I thought, well, this can't happen. That's just overkill. And so I made a few phone calls. I asked questions. I consulted experts, and in that period of time, I discovered that Hamilton Marsh was the largest wetland between Nanaimo, Port Alberni, and Cumberland. It's the most prolific waterfowl brood marsh. I discovered that wetlands filter water, and they hold water in times of drought and also keep it under control in times of flooding. All the wildlife and all the things that depend on wetlands and their rapid disappearance. So I got a bit panicky, and I phoned a few people, and they sent me to all the reports. And the more I knew, this place needed saving, no matter what.
Then other places I think that are amazing are ones that the people are putting a lot of effort and thought into restoring them and improving them, because people that know wetland areas can see what it should look like and what it could look like. And when there are donors, funders, different organizations or municipalities that recognize they have something of great value and that it can be restored back to a really productive system for water for the local citizens, the population and such, but also for the wildlife and for recreation, for people to go through, designated trails. If you trample all over, if you have a garden, so to speak, if people were allowed to run around and ride bicycles and trample all over your garden, it's going to be shot. Same thing with a wetland restoration project. There need to be specific trails so that people can enjoy it and see it, but not damage what they're coming actually to go look and see.
So even though we now live in a world where politicians, scientists, whoever else is involved in policy making potentially has a lot more information about the importance of wetlands, we're still in a place where saving them can be incredibly difficult, and where, from a more practical sense, we're still losing wetlands. And one of the best ways that we can kind of stop that or slow that down is, as citizens, to get involved with wetland protection. Do you have any advice for people that do want to get involved and help to protect? What would you recommend for people to move that direction?
Well, I think first and foremost maybe is appreciating them. Get out there, take people out there, learn about them, because you care about what you love and what you're familiar with. That's one of the advantages of some of these apps and stuff. People go for a walk in the woods in the summertime. Little birds are hard to identify. You bring along the Merlin app, and it hears the birds and identifies, and you say, you know what, I just walked through this forest, and I'm not a birder, but there's these 12 species of birds that I was like right in their territory, and they live here, and they had cool sounds, and I can see a picture of them, so I know what I didn't see, so I appreciate it. So if you go out there and you appreciate it, you get out into nature, that's good. That's really important for kids. And I was going to say, like now, and we have the luxury, we're in beautiful Arrington here out in the countryside, but most people spend most of their lives in urban settings. So for example, Buttertub's in Nanaimo. Nanaimo's like 100,000 people. Most people spend most of their lives in cities. They don't get out into remote nature. So they need to experience nature right in their backyard, in Buttertub's, beautiful trees along their streets, right? You know, pollinator gardens, right? And then once they appreciate that, then they have to just, you know, kind of vote, you know, contribute to agencies, like participate in, you know, people that are trying to protect Hamilton Marsh, Buttertubs, whatever, you know, support the Nature Conservancy, support NALT, support the Hamilton Wetland Conservation Group, you know what I mean? Just do your part as in every way you can, you know? You don't have to be the activist that goes out there because maybe you're not, you know, familiar enough with it, but if you're aware and you help out, then that goes a long ways, right?
For sure.
Prioritizing, right? Like you know, this marsh is important to me. Let your politicians, your decision makers, your town council know that I value this, my kids value this, I want it protected, right?
One of the biggest themes that we had coming through a lot of the interviews was how important it is to get kids involved and get kids out there into the marsh and have their hands getting wet. So even though lots of us as kids had problems with the marsh, all I remember about the marsh was like, I knew my feet were going to get wet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I remember. It was like I knew where the line was, and if I went past there, it looked really cool. And it's kind of mad I couldn't go play in the water because also there was leeches. I remember your dad telling me watch out for leeches.
Okay, I actually was going to talk about the leeches because I have this distinct memory of getting leeches all over my body.
No.
And there probably weren't that many, but it just felt like it at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like you had to use, you had to burn them off.
No.
Like, like they wouldn't let go unless you like put a flame up to them, kind of thing.
The little black eyes.
So the leeches were very real.
I hate that.
Yeah. But yeah. How
now that my skin's crawling thinking about it. It still teaches us so much as children and gets us involved in a way that I think is incredibly important. Kids don't know what they're supposed to care about, and they don't understand the value of things unless they emotionally connect. And that's not just kids, that's all of us. That's just humans in general. But if you can get kids involved really young, there's a higher chance of them staying involved as they get older and caring about these things when they have more power to make changes as well. As we've also talked about, there is so much value in the mess. And I think that when you can get kids out into a marsh and let them get dirty and just literally mess around with what's going on in front of them, see all the other animals that are also involved in the mess, and see the value of that creativity that happens in the mess, that can be incredibly powerful for their entire lives. Not only how they see nature, but also how they connect to the world around them, how they see interactions with other human beings, how they see creative projects in their future, whatever. Just understanding that it's in that messiness and it's in that lack of order that the creation actually happens can just be so powerful for allowing them to have confidence moving on into other areas of life as well. For me, I'm always trying to bring everything that I see in the outer world kind of into the inner world as a reflection, as a way of understanding how every natural process has a place in our lives, and as a way to kind of bring us to be a more happy and whole individual. And to me, wetlands are kind of the perfect metaphor for that. We talked about this with Camilla as well. But marshes show us this incredible world that on the surface looks like it's a complete and utter gong show, and like there's maybe no value for us as individuals, as human beings. It's messy, sometimes it's smelly, it's full of dead stuff a lot of the time. You can't usually fish in it. Sometimes you can't even like walk in it or swim in it because it's just muck. But again, that's where all the processes happen. That's where all the change happens. That's where all the animals come to eat, where they come to be sheltered. It's where they come to drink. And it's in that mess and that dynamic world that we see creation, that we see our aquifers being refilled, that we see clouds being created, that we see all of these things come together that make the world turn, make water turn, and bring us life. So if we can sit and just take a moment by a marsh, maybe we're uncomfortable initially, but if we can let the marsh kind of transform us in a way and let us see the importance of all the muck and all the confusion and how it is actually what is creating the world around us in a positive way, I think we can bring that also into our lives and help it to create and maybe even see the world as a softer place than how we had initially seen it. And I think also seeing how people have come together in all these different forms to work with marshes, to either save marshes or to educate other people about marshes, and how much joy and love they have for this ecosystem can also really help to show all of us that there is more hope in this world right now. We're all aware that things are going crazy. We're in a mess globally right now, but that doesn't mean that there isn't hope and beauty in the world. And if we can come together with other people who are also working towards a similar goal, we can see a lot more of that hope actually existing in a physical, tangible way in our communities and around us. And as most of these guests pinpointed, every single person has something of value to add to helping to protect and educate people when it comes to marshes. It can be as little as citizen science, you going out with your kids and counting frogs and reporting that, or reporting the kinds of birds that you see in a marsh. Or it can be as much as sitting on a board that is trying to save a marsh or trying to educate people about the nature that's around them. As little or as big as you can be involved, it matters. And it not only matters to your life, but to the community members that you're impacting and involved in, or with, as well. I think one of the biggest lessons that we have to learn as humans is that sometimes you just have to let things be as they are, even if to you in that moment you can't be a part of them the way that you think it's valuable, because there's other value in them. So I also want to give a big shout out to Charlie and Sheila Pickard for letting me use their property to do most of the filming on. The last interview that I did of this series was with Charlie, and Charlie has been on this property for 60 years. He has seen so many changes with how water sits on this land. Since he's had it, he's actually had wetlands show up because of how people around him have changed their land use. And that has meant that he has had to adjust how he uses the land and how he relates to his own livelihood as well in the process. So I thought it was really important to kind of end this series talking to somebody who uses marshes or wetlands in a practical way while also providing food for himself and also protecting nature in a way. But not only is he involved in a personal way, but he also let us come onto his property, him and Sheila, and film 7 out of 8 of the episodes here. Just a disclaimer, he's my father-in-law, so that was our in for doing this. But they could have said no, and they did not. They let us come in and set up in numerous locations on the property to film. And I'm incredibly grateful because this podcast would not have happened without having a beautiful, wonderful location like this to film in. And also thank you to all of my incredible guests who came and sat with me and trusted me to film them, to record them, and to share their knowledge with the world. It was so interesting. Every conversation I could have had last for hours and hours, but I don't think anybody else would have been able to sit through that. And these people are all very busy because what they do is so important in this world. So it was very, very humbling to have them come and sit with me and give me that time and trust me with their words. So thank you to any of you that may be watching this right now. And last, but definitely not least, all of you that have watched this, I am so grateful that you have sat down and taken the time to watch this interview or other interviews and learned a little bit more about the marsh. Because marshes are not only important to me, they're important to every single one of us, and I hope that that's something that you've taken away from these interviews. That any of us can get involved and make a difference, and it matters that we do make that difference for every single human being and animal on this planet. Thank you so much for being here, and this has been What About the Wetlands? So the more I've gotten into this work too, the more that I've learned how many people there are that are actually really interested in all this stuff and want to make a difference and want to get out there and touch nature and be involved in nature. And there's a lot. There is a huge community, especially on Vancouver Island, of people that genuinely love nature and care about it. And you'll see that if you start to Google like nature organizations. There are endless nature organizations. I can't even keep up with the names of them half the time. You think you're talking to one and you're talking to another because there's just, the names are similar and there's just so many. So there is a flavor out there for everyone, and it's an incredible way to build community, to get to know people that are interested in the things that you're interested in. It's an incredible way to feel empowered, because not only are you doing something incredible, but you're also surrounded by people who are doing incredible things, and you all inspire each other. A great example of that is, I'd say, both Lynn and Carrie. Like, Lynn is in her 80s, and she has been pretty much her entire life doing this work. Everywhere you go, somebody knows Lynn. And everywhere you go, you hear some new project that Lynn is a part of that you can be involved in. Carrie Reed, I've known since I was probably 18 years old. I used to hang out with her son a lot, so I spent a lot of time with her. And her and Lynn have worked together on numerous projects trying to eradicate invasive species and things like that. So once you start to get to know a couple of people, you truly figure out that you know essentially hundreds of people. You're one person away from hundreds of people who are doing similar to the work that you're doing. And I think that is an incredible way of also feeling better about the world when we've got so many crazy things going on. When you can look at what's right in front of you and see that you have these incredible people doing amazing things, it's a lot easier to have hope and to be inspired and to keep moving forward and actively making the world a better place.